My name is Mike Gravel, former senator from the state of Alaska and recent unsuccessful presidential candidate. I want to, as one of the main authors of the National Initiative for Democracy, I want to go over in detail the Democracy Amendment and the Democracy Act, which is the package that comprises the legislative proposal of the democracy, the National Initiative for Democracy. And I'll go section by section in both the amendment and the act that I hope will help explain the thinking behind each of the sections. Now, this will be somewhat of a tedious approach, but I hope will be an enlightening approach. And so those of you that want to stay with this process, I want to commend you for your patience. And you can come back and forth to it as we go into it. First, the Democracy Amendment. Now, this has got 7 sections to it. It's essentially 1 page in length. The first section of the amendment, now keep in mind, this is an amendment to the Constitution of the United States that will have 7 sections. And it will be the law of the land when it's enacted by the American people, not by the Congress. In fact, the process that we have here goes entirely around the Congress. This is enacted by the American people directly. And you'll see that these various 7 sections delineate how this is being done. The first section is really asserting the legislative power of the citizens of the United States. It asserts this power of the citizens to enact, repeal, amend public policy, laws, charters, and constitutions by local, state, and national initiatives, and that this power cannot be denied by the United States or any state. It's essentially asserting the obvious sovereign power that each individual has as they act within the constituency of an area, the state, local, or federal. It's very important to understand this because you and I can both point to people that we know, oh, that person's too dumb to make laws. And I know some, and I'm sure you know some. In fact, I know some in the Congress that are too dumb to make laws, but they do make laws. But that's not it's not that dumb person in Congress that makes the law. It's the majority of the people in the Congress that make the law. And it's the majority of the people in a constituency, whether it's the city of Dallas, or whether it's the state of Maryland, or whether it's the American constituency of the people. That constituency in the United States is 130 million people. So it's the majority of that constituency that is making the law. So that's the protection that we have against the dumb people making laws. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing in the National Initiative that does away with human nature. We will have the ability to make mistakes, but when the people are empowered, they, of course, will have the power to change and correct their mistakes. Many times when representative government makes mistakes, they don't readily correct those mistakes because it's to their disadvantage, because they'll be held accountable for those mistakes in the next election. Now that's Section 1. Section 2 of the amendment merely states that it says that it sanctions the national election conducted by a non-profit corporation called Philadelphia 2. Now, this is a California non-profit corporation that was incorporated in 1992 in California. Now, this corporation is now, its headquarters is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, all this corporation is doing, it's a 501c4, so that means that it can receive monies, and the monies are not taxable. You can't get money and donate it, and it's deductible. That's a C3. And all this corporation is doing is conducting the election on behalf of the American people so that Americans will have the opportunity to vote for the national initiative. Now, of course, if the Congress were to conduct this election or authorize this election, you wouldn't have to do this. But the Congress is never, never in your lifetime going to conduct an election to dilute its power and empower the American people. So since the Congress is not going to empower the American people, well, who's going to do this? Well, the people are going to have to do it themselves. And so that's what you do. You create a nonprofit corporation to go out and conduct a national election. This is exactly what is in Article 1 of the Amendment of the Constitution. And that is, what is an election? It's the gathering of the people who make a decision. And so that's exactly what we're doing with the nonprofit corporation, which will have total transparency, more transparency than we'll have any government election in American and world history. We will be able to identify everybody that voted, and there will be a signature to determine that they voted, because this is going to be an election over a period of time. And then we will cleanse the rolls of those people who die by the time this election is complete. So that's all this is doing. Now this is the same process that was, well, you'll see it here as we go forward. But that's all this is doing. This is saying that the election conducted by Philadelphia II is the enactment is legal. That's essentially what happened in Article 7 of the Constitution that brought about the creation of our Constitution. Article 3 now creates the electoral trust. Now there's a lot of misunderstanding about the electoral trust. Now, in the 24 states in the United States that have initiative lawmaking, where people can make laws at the state and local level, all of those states are controlled, the process is controlled by representative government. And that means that the people aren't really independent in their efforts to make laws. In fact, most of their efforts are sabotaged by local judiciary and by representative government itself, by state legislatures, repeatedly. In fact, it's a continual effort by representative government and legislatures to try and sabotage the people's right to make laws. They put up all kinds of barriers to this. So if you're truly to be independent, if the people are truly to have a process where they're going to be independent in making laws, then they have to do exactly what every legislative body has. When I was in the Senate, we have the procedures of the Senate are implemented by the Secretary of the Senate. That makes the Senate independent from the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives has a body that administers the procedures for the House of Representatives, separate from the Senate, separate from the executive, the presidency. And so if the people are going to be independent of the executive, the president, the Senate, or the Congress, they have to have their own agency that administers the procedures on their behalf. And so people who say, well, why do we need the electoral trust? Well, you need it if you're going to be independent, and if you don't have that, you're going to be controlled by representative government. So they just really don't understand the legislative structure of government. And that's unfortunate that they don't understand that, and that's why they rail against the creation of another, what they figure is another agency of government. It's a very vital agency for the people to have so that they can be independent and exercise that independence in a very real way. Now this electoral trust will have a board of trustees. Now they are elected state by state, but all it is an elected board of trustees, one for each state, one for the District of Columbia, one for the territories, and one for Puerto Rico. So you just have 53 individuals who are term limited. They're only going to serve 4 years. They're staggered, and they don't have any power to get involved in any facet of an individual initiative. All they can do is oversee that the policies set up in law are adhered to. And like I say, they don't have any real power, they don't have any patronage. So it's going to be people who are really concerned about the initiative process and that the people's rights are adhered to that will present themselves for this office. And so I don't think that there's anything to really worry about this kind of activity. They'll have total transparency and, like I say, term limited. So that's the electoral trust, very vital to the process. The first thing that the electoral trust will do is go out and register every voter in the country for life. And they will conduct all of the elections on initiatives from one central location in a process that will be totally transparent, rather than the process you have now of all the federal elections conducted by state and local authorities. Now, the fourth item in the process of the amendment is the article that sets up the approval of how many votes it takes to amend the Constitution. And here there's two levels you've got to keep in mind. The Constitution is superior law to statute law. And so when you amend the Constitution, you have to have more than 50% of the registered voters to amend the Constitution. And that's very tough. And you want to make it tough to amend the Constitution. Not only do you have a majority vote, you have to have 2 votes. 6 months, no sooner than 6 months, and no later than a year apart. And that's how you amend the Constitution, by majoritarian vote. No supermajority, because when you have a supermajority, what you're saying is a minority rules. Now that's how you amend the Constitution. Now when it comes to a federal statute, a federal law, it all it takes is 1 vote on a majority basis of the majority that turns out. And that's how we have all elections for federal office since the beginning of our country. So when you run for president, whatever the voter turnout is, it's the majority of the people who turn out for that election. That's who elects the President of the United States, or for a member of Congress, and since the turn of the century, for members of the Senate. Prior to that, they were elected by they were appointed by state legislatures. So that's the precedent that we follow for votes for, and that's in Article 4 of the amendment to the Constitution. Article 5 was something that I really wanted to put into the Constitution, and that was that sponsors of any initiative have to be natural persons. That means they can't be corporations. They have to be human beings. Since only human beings can vote, therefore only human beings, citizens, can be the ones that can sponsor an initiative under this process. And then Section 6, now we come to the issue of financing of initiatives. And therefore, this is very vital. And that is that since only human beings can vote, therefore only human beings can donate money for an initiative or against an initiative. No corporations in any way can donate money for or against an initiative. Now, what's unique in this regard is that we do not have a cap on the money. So if, let's say, Warren Buffett wanted to spend $1 billion for an initiative and Bill Gates wanted to spend $1 billion against the initiative, they're entitled to do that. What's key to this process is we have a communications process within the national initiative that is such that a person would have to hide, would have to really avoid being informed about what their interest is in an initiative. Because once a person knows anything about an initiative, they can be guided by their enlightened self-interest, and it won't make any difference how much money anybody spends for or against an initiative. That person will be guided by their enlightened self-interest. So don't worry about how much money is spent to try and persuade you. Once you know what's in money can bribe and buy legislatures. It can buy politicians, but it can't buy you, the majority of citizens, because you'll be voting for your enlightened self-interest. If they happen to spend all this money for something you believe in, then there's just a meeting of the minds as to what your enlightened self-interest is all about. But it's very important to limit the amount of money only to natural human beings, and to not turn around and limit the amount of money natural human beings can spend, because that limits the voice. That puts a cap on the freedom of speech. And when you begin to do that, where do you draw the line? Do you say that a millionaire can't speak, but a person who has $100,000 can speak, or a person who can just get a megaphone can speak? Somebody has got to make that decision, and that becomes very capricious and very dangerous. And so I don't think you can go there. So you can't put a cap on it, but what you do is we have very specific procedures that you go to jail if you don't really reveal where the money comes from the individuals who do spend money on this issue. But the key, the response to this issue, is to provide the process of informing the people what their enlightened self-interest is, and we do that in the law. And of course, the last section is the provisions to enforce this article. Most of the effect, not all of the amendments to the Constitution, it always ends by saying the Congress has the right to go forward and pass whatever laws are necessary to enforce the amendment in question. What we say here is that the people, through initiative, have the right to put forth procedures to enforce this amendment, which of course is the power we're giving to the people to make laws. There may be a confusion between Section 2 of the amendment and Section 4. Bear in mind that Section 2 is how the people enact the national initiative. All that is doing is permitting the people to go around the government and enact the national initiative directly, since the Congress won't enact this and empower the people to make laws. This is not dealing with policy issues, whether you want to vote on a woman's right to do this, or vote on whether or not we declare war. These are policy issues. All we're talking about with the national initiative is the power for the people to make laws and amend constitutions. That's it. And so Article 2 is how the people can do this by voting in this election being conducted by Philadelphia 2. Now, Section 4 deals with how the people will amend a constitution, the Constitution of the United States, and how they will enact federal statutes. They will amend the Constitution of the United States through 2 elections, voting on a majoritarian basis. In other words, let's say you and I put forth a constitutional amendment. The first election that will take place will vote for that amendment. If it passes, it has to have another vote 6 months later, but no longer than a year later. And it has to have another majority vote. If it doesn't get another majority vote, it fails completely. If it gets another majority vote, then it is accepted as an amendment to the Constitution. Now, with respect to a federal statute, or a city council statute, or a state statute, it just takes a simple majority vote in that election, in that jurisdiction, in the relevant jurisdiction, whether it's a local jurisdiction, a state jurisdiction, or a federal jurisdiction. I hope that clears up the difference between Section 2 and Section 4 of the Democracy Amendment. That's all there is to the amendment of the democracy amendment that's embodied in the national initiative.